Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to NASM Live. My name is Prentiss, and I'm here with Wendy Batts and Marty Miller. How are you all doing this afternoon?
Fantastic.
Great, thank you, Prentiss.
All right, and we have our man Greg in the background, making sure it all runs smoothly, and he gives us a salute. So let's get started. This is going to be a fun program today after reading through it a few times. But we want to design another program using the CES as a focused warm-up or movement prep. And just as a reminder, CES is really a targeted flexibility and strength training program that can be used as a workout on its own, and we've covered that. And we can use it as a special warm-up. And what we want to do is identify the problem using several of the assessments that we'll see later as Wendy talks us through this very special client. We're going to solve the problem, which is going to include the program design and implement the solution. We actually have to take this client and make this client do a little work. Pay a little sweat equity to get the results of the program. So let's go ahead and get started. Wendy, tell us who we're training today.
Yes, well, this is actually one of my clients. I did change his name, of course, but I wanted to give you a little bit of background. So John Smith is our client for the day. He is 27 years old. He is a professional basketball player, so he is in the NBA. Some history about John is he's played basketball since he was 5 years old. He's played in college, of course, and was a first-round draft pick. He has had low back surgery and multiple ankle sprains, and has had occasional anterior knee pain, so medial side knee pain and front knee pain, actually, and right hand wrist pain sometimes after a long game. He does not take any prescription medication. However, he does take supplements. These supplements are provided by his team, and his team actually has an RD that's on staff that works with him with his diet and how much calories he's supposed to take in per day. So he eats a super clean diet, and of course he measures his own calorie intake. He does wear a technology strap that measures his sleep, his calorie expenditure, his resting heart rate, max heart rate, etc. And he does share that information with me as well. So when we're not training together and he's actually doing pickup games or working with a different coach, he sends me that data. So therefore, I can make sure every time we're designing a program that it's going to be good for him. And his current goals are basically just to stay competitive and increase his explosiveness, his durability and endurance. And his goal weight before he leaves for camp is 203, and he is currently at 208. So again, just a little bit of information too before we move on. I have been training John now for 3 years, and I get him in the off season. So he has gone through all 5 phases technically 7 phases of the OPT model. So this was actually one of his last programs that we did before we sent him to camp. However, he has come back. We have gathered new data, and he will be able to undulate again at the start of the season with just a few minor tweaks, adding some of the CES on the front end of each and every program. So we wanted to show you guys that when you're thinking of the CES, that it doesn't have to be someone that's just coming out of rehab, that this is something that we can put in front of any phase of the model as long as it makes sense for whoever you're training.
Okay, perfect, Wendy. And I just want, just for clarity, how soon do you get him after the season, after last game playoffs, and how much time do you have with him before he goes back to training camp?
Well, obviously, this is a unique situation because, I mean, we've got to think that he's done with the season early. So because of everything going on right now, I'm not actually going to start back with him doing these programs until probably middle of June. And It's mainly because his wife is pregnant and we want to make sure that everything is good on her end. But with that being said, we want to take in consideration, this information. And then I train him 3 times a week. And I'm going to have him up until he leaves to go to camp.
Okay. Okay, perfect. So so if you're ready, let's talk about his assessments. Now,
Sure.
because he's an NBA player, we're going to do the typical static postural assessments, some transitional assessments, but we're going to do something a little more dynamic today as well. So let's
Absolutely.
go through it.
So he is one of the most compliant clients that I have. And so keeping that in mind, he does a lot of self work. So he does his homework probably better than any other client I've ever had in all of my training history. So he knows, the importance of foam rolling and stretching, and he does a lot of his own recovery. He has recovery boots. He has a power dot. He has different things like that he implements on his own. But when he came in, just looking at him from just a static posture, the only thing that I really noticed with him right now is that his feet slightly externally rotated.
Okay. Well, that's pretty good, especially with the
Yeah.
pounding that those guys take. Basketball players in general take over the course of the season.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And usually they're a train wreck when they come back. But again, because he's very compliant, that's really is kind of a different situation. So when we get into the next slide, you're going to see his transitional movements or, and his assessment results, which again, he's just coming off of his season. So this is very, very good. And oftentimes we see the typical feet turning out, anterior tilt, forward head, rounded shoulders. But in this particular client or with this particular client, all during the overhead squat was that his feet slightly turned out, which again, the same thing we saw in the static posture. So that was no surprise there. And then on his single leg squat results, he had just inward trunk rotation. So he actually had really good control on his balance as well as he didn't have any knee valgus.
Okay. Yeah, I think I don't have any questions about that. This is looking pretty atypical for those of us who may have worked with athletes once or twice.
Very much.
I got
so.
nothing.
I got nothing either, which is great. That's why we wanted to use him actually. But
Yeah.
because he is a professional athlete, we did want to implement some of the dynamic assessments. Now, again, there are many assessments that we could have done. I could have had him do shuttle runs. I could have had him do different types of drills out on the track. But he actually has another coach that he works with that works specifically with more of his SAQ type activity. So they do. He basically has an SAQ day with another coach. And so with that in mind, I wanted to use these two specific assessments because as his trainer building strength and mobility with him, I wanted to make sure that I had the data that I needed to best execute any type of program I designed. So with that being said, I had him do the shark skill test. And for those of you guys that don't really know what that is, that's basically when you put the boxes, there's 9 boxes and the client starts in the center box on one foot and they jump in each foot or they go to each box, always coming back to the middle box as fast as they can. And if his hands come off of his hip, it's a fault. And if his foot touches a line, it's a fault, which means you add time on top of that once it's completed. And so with that, with those results or knowing that going into it, John on his left side, he actually finished it in 4.3 seconds, which is super fast. But he did have one foot fault on the left side. So his total time would be 4.4 seconds. On the right side, he had 4.8 and he did have one foot fault, so it's 4.9. And again, you're going to see a difference between his left and his right. So, that tells a lot. But then again, John is right-handed.
So I'm guessing that Wendy's going to say he's right-handed and potentially because it's a contralateral sport jumping, he may be a left foot jumper, which shows the difference in the scores there. Did I cover that for you?
That is correct. I'm sorry. I didn't even know I cut out. But yes, that is correct. So again, this is not uncommon. They're not always going to be identical. So, it's nothing alarming as a coach gathering this information, but it is good data to have. After we completed that, we did the Davies assessment. And so basically that's where you put a piece of tape out 36 inches. And then he has one hand on one side of the tape, another hand on the other side of the tape, and he is in a push-up position, just as you'll see in the demo here on the bottom right on the on the flow chart that we provided. So that is the position that they're in. And then you time them for 15 seconds and see how many times he can touch kind of the outer part of his pinky, keeping good alignment. And again, we're looking at how many touches he has, but we're also noticing, does his head fall? Does he have scapular winging? Is his, is there an arch in his back, or what's happening, or can he maintain proper alignment? And again, John's pretty dialed, so his form was fantastic. There was nothing to note besides the fact that he touched 33 times, which again is very good.
So then with my detective trainer hat on, I noticed that on his single leg squat assessment, he had a little inward rotation. Mm-hmm. So none of that showed up on this particular dynamic assessment.
It did not. But
okay.
Again, if there is anything that seems noteworthy, that is definitely the time to do that, because again, it's more results. It's not just about the time, it's also about the form as well. So, mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Again, this is a pretty atypical case for some athlete who's just been playing a lot of professional ball. So let's go on.
Yeah. So this slide, if you're new to assessments, I wanted to provide, again, I've been using a goniometer for many, many years. And so I provided you with the data that I really had with this client to show you. But if you've never used a goniometer, you're not familiar with the goniometer, then we have the the mobility flow chart next to you, so we can kind of talk through, these are the results I got with the goni, but if you don't know how to use it, you can get the same results, meaning a pass or fail. That's going to give you a lot of data. And so the first one, DF, is just dorsiflexion. So he's laying in a supine position. We put him in dorsiflexion and we measured his range of motion. Now, ideal is 20. 10 is good for walking, but from 10 to 20 is what you're looking for. As you can see, John has 8 on his right and 10 on his left. Again, this is not uncommon for someone that's had multiple ankle sprains or a type of athlete that is jumping a lot. So that information, again, is just good to have.
Okay.
Knee extension, again, he was at 35 and on left and right. And again, that isn't ideal. So, but it's good data to have. Again, it tells me a lot of information about the short head of his bicep fem, what's going on around the knee, and as well as the calf complex. Hip abduction, ideal is 45. On right, he had 40. Left, he was at 41. So he was pretty good there. Internal, hip internal, again, ideal is 45. And right, he measured 35 and left 37. And then hip external rotation and hip extension, as well as shoulder flexion, you're going to see WNL, which just means within normal limits. So he did measure ideal or close to ideal for those particular measurements. And so, again, if you're not sure how to use the goni, but you want to use some of the new mobility assessments, you can see the comparison of the two. So, for example, for dorsiflexion, he could have performed a weight-bearing lunge. And you can see, did his knee come close to the wall? Where was he? Did he pass or, quote, fail? And so, if you're going through the new content, just look at the different assessments on the execution. And it just kind of gives you more information to go along with the dynamic assessments that we performed, as well as the transitional information. And then you're going to take all of that information and then design the appropriate program for your client.
Okay, and one question with your goni assessment mm-hmm. is which side does he experience most of his recurrent ankle sprains?
Not shockingly, is his right. So, and again, it was mainly because he's had more issues, sprains on his right. But again, he's a left jumper. So his foot plant and everything on his jumps on a layup and everything, he is very dynamic and explosive on his left, especially in comparison to his right.
Okay, that was actually what I was thinking, but you never want to assume in these cases. I'm guessing that his brain says, we want to stiffen this ankle up a little bit because you don't seem to be able to stabilize it yourself. So
exactly.
That may reflect the decrease in the range of motion. Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's talk about what you did for him. How did you solve the problem?
Sure. So like what we've done in the past, we're going to have Marty write some stuff on the board so we can kind of talk through the program, but we will provide you with the program that we're going to talk about. You will have access to that to download it through NASM. And so with that being said, I don't know if you guys can see Marty, but Marty, we are going to foam roll first. Not surprising. But we're going to foam roll his calves, his adductors, lats, and then I'm going to talk why.
Sure. So just going back to the assessment for sure. You know, this guy is as clean as you're going to get, but that doesn't mean we just kind of ignore the process because, you know, you saw that even though he moves well, and part of that is all the awesome training Wendy's put him through, he knows how to move, even though he still has some movement dysfunction. So that bilateral foot external rotation, the goniometric measurement, or if you would have put him through the mobility, we would have seen some issues in that lunge test. And then obviously with the adduction, you know, that inward rotation, and then a little bit of the lat tightness, the arms fall forward. So those are things that, you know, she definitely wants to assess it or address. And then obviously, you know, she's going to take into account what exercises she's going to put John through just to make sure he has a little extra range of motion before the workout.
Yep. And again, we're holding tender areas for approximately 30 seconds. We can add some of the movement, 4 to 6 times for some active movement. But then after that, we are going to take him through static stretching. So static stretching, we're going to stretch his calves, again, slight foot external rotation. We are going to statically stretch his hip flexors and his lats as well. And Marty, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah. And the muscles that tend to be overactive, you know, without even, you know, when you just look at anybody, these are muscles that tend to be overactive. And the hip flexor is a great stretch because, you know, if you know one thing about Wendy or any of the other NASM instructors, there's going to be a lot of glute activation. So let's get that hip flexor complex to relax so we know we're going to get a better activation of our glutes, as you'll see in the next series of exercises.
Yes. And so, you know, next, when you look at the template, we're going to go into activation. So again, we're using the OPT template, even though instead of just the CES template, we are designing a phase 5 program. So under activation, we're going to have John perform a ball bridge. And because he is an athlete and I've been working with him for multiple years, and there wasn't anything in the assessment that told me that I shouldn't do so, John does a ball bridge with a 65-pound weight on his hips. And so, you know, again, if this wasn't someone like John or this is a new client, I would just do a ball bridge with no weight. But again, you don't be afraid to load these athletes or these clients that are ready for that type of load. Following that, we're going to do a cable TKE. And Marty, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So getting that terminal extension, so you can use a power band or a cable with, you know, some type of like cuff support, having that person drive their heel into the ground and get that full terminal knee extension. A lot of people lack that full extension of their knee, so it's a great exercise for the little muscles behind the knee, as well as you're still going to get some increased dorsiflexion at that point in time. So it's really important, especially I find for jumping athletes or running athletes, to make sure they have that full terminal knee extension. And you'll activate the VMO as well.
Exactly. And because he had complained that sometimes he'll have anterior knee pain. That was also another good reason and another important reason for the VMO activation as well. And one of the last
last exercises it looks like we have there is a single leg hop to hold in both the frontal and transverse planes. And now that Wendy's back, tell us why you picked that one for our basketball athlete.
Yes, well, we also did the lateral tube walks under activation too. I don't know if you heard me before I cut out, but we want to do that for the glute med activation. And then we did go to single leg hop to hold in the frontal and transverse planes. And again, we're doing that too because think about his sport. We also want to work on, we are in a phase 5. So again, you know, I wouldn't put him in phase 5. I know that he was pretty dialed in phases 1 through 5. he does have good stability and good arch. Now we are in that, we are going top to hold to see if he, quote, owns it. This is really important, especially with someone that would have weak ankles on multiple sprains that he's had in the past. And then to kind of switch it up a little bit, and a little bit of a cold, kind of something that's different that we don't often see when you're doing something like this is then after he's done his activation and balance, we're then going to do dynamic stretching. And we're doing dynamic stretching because we're preparing his body for a phase 5 workout. So again, we have done all, quote, the CES type work up front, and now we are preparing him for the resistance portion coming next. And so with that being said, we're having John perform a push-up with rotation, and he's also going to do a walking lunge with a twist. And Marty, do you want to anything with that?
So the reason we like this is for some people, this could be part of their workout. That might be all they're capable of metabolically. But with John, this is just getting his central nervous system. And also, I view it, especially with our athletes or athletic population, doesn't have to be a professional athlete, you're starting to switch the mindset that, okay, it's time to now get ready to work. This is all the movement preparation, but this almost makes it, quote unquote, game time for them, where they know the intensity is starting to ratchet up. So mentally, it's a great transition, but also physiologically, you're now getting the body to move in sequence with everything, but now you're starting to gradually pick up the intensity for what's coming next.
Okay. And before we continue, I have a question here from Kelsey, and thank you for watching, listening with us today, Kelsey. Kelsey wants to know why the lats for inhibit and lengthen. And Kelsey goes on to say, I'm assuming it's just because of sport-specific demand, passing, catching, rebounding.
Marty, you want to take that?
Sure. So one, anytime you're doing any jumping in any of the workout, you are getting the lats moving. So it's great to inhibit them and lengthen them, making sure that you have optimal range of motion. And remember, if our lats are even a little bit restricted, it's going to throw off things in the shoulder as well as in the low back. So it's just one of those things, from a preventative measure. So even if they have near ideal, and most men are going to have tight lats, and then if there's any overhead work throughout the workout, we want to make sure that we address those lats, because the lats are the only muscle that connect the upper and lower body. So it's really important to address, I'm going to say, in most workouts. And I'm definitely going to put myself in this category. Very rarely do I see men have enough extensibility in their lats to not check that box for most workouts.
And think about, also, if I may add just a little bit of that, if you think about a jump in any jumping athlete, and you use the analogy of a 3-stage rocket, that first stage is going to come from that that extension of the ankle and the hip extension, the hip extending from that counter movement. That third stage of the rocket is going to be that arm swing, especially if you're a rebounding athlete, getting those arms overhead, snatching some boards. Mm-hmm. If your lats are tight, you're going to have to, if your lats are tight and you can't get that full extensibility, getting those arms above the head, your body's going to steal that range of motion from someplace else, maybe possibly the lower back. So that's another reason why we just want to have that area nice and open for any athlete, I guess, in a jumping sport. And I will let you continue with your program, Marty.
Yeah.
So now, basically, we've got him warmed up. We feel like he's ready to go. And again, for some, that may just be a workout within itself. But we are focusing on a phase 5 workout, which means we are going to perform supersets. So with this client, we are going to do a strength-based exercise anywhere from 1 to 5 repetitions. For this case, we are going to do 5 for the strength. And then we're going to follow that immediately with the same type of movement pattern, utilizing the same prime movers. And in this case, for John, he is going to do 10 repetitions as fast as he can right after that before he does any kind of rest. So the first one we're going to focus on is his chest. And so we're going to do a dumbbell chest press. He's going to do 5 repetitions using 100-pound dumbbells, and that's 100-pound per arm, by the way. So super heavy. And then is following it up immediately with a med ball rotational chest pass. Now, in our facility, we do have a wall. So it is a cement wall where he can throw the ball and have it come back, and and he can explosively throw it and catch it at the same time. However, again, you would have to make adjustments if you did not have something like that. Marty, do you have anything to add to that?
No, and just to go quickly, just for anyone that might be newer to this phase of training, is now that we're warmed up, we do the heavy exercise first, because rarely in life will you ever activate all the muscle fibers in a movement pattern. So that heavy chest press, because we're doing that movement pattern at this point, wakes up all the muscle fibers, or as many of them as you can get. So now when you go move explosively, they're now all going to say, oh, I now know what you want me to do. So that way now you're going to get the best power production by working on the heavy force production and then the speed component to it.
Okay, and one question, follow-up for you, Mark, and just talk about the rationale of why we use 25 pounds for the medicine ball, and why we didn't go after the big dogs for this training.
Yeah, sure. Generally, you're going to use roughly 10% of your body weight. Now, if someone's elite, you could vary up to that just a little bit. But for John, if he's 205 pounds, let's just use 20 pounds. The key thing is, at some point when the weight's too heavy, you're not going to get full explosive movement. There's going to be a deterioration in the speed component. We already hit the heavy component here, so we're looking now for the body to move explosively. So the 10% of your body weight is a safe estimation for most people. Now you're going to have your outliers like John, that maybe they go to 15% of their body weight if it's an implement, or you're just using simply body weight, because you're looking for how fast you can execute, not how heavy of an object could you throw. We're looking for the speed, the miles per hour component to it.
And I guess I do have another follow-up. So we have 10 reps scheduled for this program. Rep 7, speed starts to drop off. What do you do as his trainer?
Sure. Wendy, since you work with John, do you want to address how you'd handled it before in the past?
Well, I'm lucky because I really haven't ever had that issue. However, if I were to have had that issue, I would have tried a lighter weight. I wouldn't necessarily lighten the strength component if he executed that with perfect form. However, then I just know that, because again, 25 pounds is more than 10% of his body weight. Because if I was going at 208, I should have grabbed right around a 20-pound weight. However, because again, I've been working with John, and this truly is one of his programs, I kept it real so you guys could see what I've done with this guy. And but if he couldn't do 25 pounds, we would drop it to a 20 at that point. Maybe if we noticed that his form was horrible at 7, we would call it at 7 and stop it. But we know for the next set 2 and 3, we definitely need to lighten the load.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So after we've done chest, then we're going to move on to a 1-arm dumbbell row. Again, he's on a bench, so he's on something stable. He is using a 100-pound weight, again, and just rowing back and doing 5 on each arm. And then as soon as he's completed that, again, because it is a client that I know, he's using a 25-pound dumbbell, he goes directly into a med ball slam. Marty, do you have anything to add to that?
Nope. The same concept stays the same, that we're getting him to move as much weight safely as he can, and then follow that up with that explosive movement. And again, reps will stay the same, and then up to 10% for the general population. But again, when you're working with an elite athlete or someone who really puts the work in, you can go over that 10%, but that's just a kind of a guideline.
Mm-hmm. And then next we're going into shoulders. He does an overhead press sitting on the bench. Again, 5 repetitions at 45 pounds, which again is heavy because you think about the core strength and then obviously alignment. And so he does 5 repetitions of that and immediately grabs a medicine ball and goes into a medicine ball to kind of toss and catch. So he tosses it up to himself and catches it as fast as he can for 10 repetitions, still using, again, that 25-pound medicine ball. And then one of the last exercises that we're doing for his legs is a hex bar deadlift. He has it loaded at 205. which again is extremely heavy. He's doing 5 repetitions of that, and then he immediately is going into leg circuits. And for those of you guys that aren't familiar with a leg circuit, it's literally doing 4 exercises as fast as they can control. Now, again, not as fast as they can, because form is still an issue the entire time. He has to maintain proper alignment, but he'll do 20, for instance, 20 prisoner squats. Then he immediately goes into 20 alternating lunges. And then he does 20 power step ups on a step that he's comfortable with. So for John, we're doing it on 10 inches, like a 10-inch step. And then as soon as he's done with that, he does 10 tuck jumps. And so he does all of that as fast as he can. He does not rest in between that leg circuit. And because his ultimate goal is endurance and then maintaining, because again, we're trying to make sure that he can handle the minutes that he's put into a game. And that's super, super important. So with that being said, one of the things that I do right after he gets done with the leg circuit, if I was a nice trainer, I would give him rest. However, I'm a trainer that knows this client well, has worked with him for a really long time. I put him on we have a Techno Gym's treadmill, and with that particular treadmill, and Marty can go into more detail about it, I do a sled push with him. And so I load him, he's at 150 pounds, and he pushes it for 125 yards. And so for John, our ultimate goal, I know he can get to doing it like at 17 seconds, but our goal is under 17. 17 was his starting point last season, and then we ended up getting him to 14 before he left. So our ultimate goal, again, is to make sure he can start at 17, and that that allows me to see where he's at the start of this season, and then therefore, again, try to get him under 14 if that's even possible, because, I mean, that is a lot of weight for a long, long distance. And Marty, I don't know if you want to talk more about that, but.
Yeah, basically, Wendy's really not nice, guys.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to clarify for the audience.
She told me that. I said, wait a minute, did you do 125 pounds for 15 yards? And yeah. So, again, I had to pause, and I was like, wait, go through that one more time. So I tend to measure wattage, but either way, you're getting great results, because the seconds or wattage, they're going to be part and parcel together. If you're moving more explosively and you're shrinking your time, your wattage has to go up. But when Wendy told me that, I said, hey, next time check his wattage. And John was right around, 1,400 watts?
It's crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah. And it's not even like the 1,400 watts. He's doing that for 125 yards. Think about a regular football field. That's from the back of one end zone past the back of the next end zone, because the end zones are only 10 yards. So it's over an entire complete football field. So Wendy's just not nice.
Yeah, that hurts me just looking at it. Yeah. And you heard it here first, NASM audience. Wendy is not nice. If you want to train with her, you really have to want it at this point.
Exactly.
Again, he's come back. We're on season number 3, so he keeps wanting more. And
it's on a continuum. That's appropriate for him because of all the things Wendy's doing, his homework, etc. I'm just saying this guy's a beast, because most people wouldn't have the mental wherewithal to be able to do that. So clearly the body's capable, so that is not out of the realm for him, but it's going to be out of the realm for a lot of people. But
right.
It's appropriate.
I could not do this.
Always said, if someone can control it and do it, then it's appropriate. So that's beast mode right there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So keep in mind too, we sent you. I'm sorry, my dogs are barking in the back.
So I think she's. Go back again. Are you back, Wendy?
She's back.
I think I'm back. So there's an updated program that we actually.
So we do have an updated program that you can take a look at, and you can see how we can easily weave CES as a targeted warm up into a Phase 5 program. And just for context, remember, this is a professional athlete. He gets paid. He has trainers, skill coaches, probably has a rehabilitation staff, but you can take a look at this program and use it as a template so that you can see how to integrate CES into some of your Phase 5 training. And I'll let you complete your actual thought, Wendy.
Well, no, I was going to tell you that there was an error on this program, and so we sent NASM a different one. So on the sled push, it will actually be 125 yards at 150 pounds. So that was so we will make sure that let's get the updated one before if you really do want a copy of this one. But then as soon as we're done, and to your point, I mean, now again, John does, I do some manual therapy work with him on the front end as well on the back end, just to make sure that he, that he's good to go to do this type of workout. Now, again, because I see him 3 times a week, we usually do our power day on Friday. So on Mondays, he comes in, we do a phase 2 workout, again, with a CES kind of activation and programming on the front end. On Wednesdays, we usually do a phase 1, just stabilization, making sure everything is ready to go. So on Friday, when we unleash the beast here, he's ready to go. Everything is activated the way that it's supposed to when he comes in. But we also know that we, really focused a lot on the stabilization and making sure too that we're not overtraining him, because we wouldn't want to do this workout, 3 to 5 times a week. That's overtraining. He would be exhausted. He would break down, and it just doesn't seem. There's no purpose for that with him. And again, he does have a skills coach that he goes and sees once or twice a week. He plays pickup games, and he also, like I said, works with an SAQ specific coach, just to work on different types of alignment and movement patterns on the field.
Can I ask you, thank you for wrapping up his program and talking a little bit about how you undulate that during the week. But I wanted to ask both of you a question about the role that we play as trainers. Now, as I see it, or as I learned it, athletes have 2 special development phases, which is general preparedness, things that we would do within this template here. With what you're doing, did very well. This is beautiful in the OPT model, although I have to say, even though you switched the variables on his sled push, still not nice.
No.
Anyway, we have this idea of general preparedness, and then we also have specific preparedness. That's where I throw in all of the so-called sports-specific SAQ exercises and some of the skill exercises that they have to experience related to the sport. Where can we serve our clients' best interests?
Well, I think specifically with John, now keep in mind, I just said that he has an SAQ coach.
Yeah, sure.
And then I also said that he also has a skills coach. That means they're working on his 3-point shot, his ups, his, different types of shots around the court, as well as, making sure that when he's on offense, what he's got to do, and on defense, what he's got to do. And those are the actual coaches that work specifically with his sport. So because he's doing that multiple hours again with other trainers, it's not going to serve me any good to do the same thing with him, because again, that's going to lead to repetitive movement, that's going to lead to injury. My goal is to make sure that he is a machine ideally lined up and that he can execute and maximize the performance and power output that I'm trying to get him to do in his programming, because that will transfer what's going to happen on the court. I mean, I'm not his skills coach. I should not be worried about, having him go up and do different types of movement with his arms and his shots and stuff like that, because again, that's really not going to help him. What's going to help him is if he can move the right way, and I can make him faster, and he can change directions and doing stuff because his muscles are firing the way that they're meant to fire. So for me, I don't take into consideration I do take into consideration because it makes sense with what I'm doing on a programming side. But I think a lot of people think that if they're like a baseball pitcher, that the more stuff that they work on with mechanics and their throwing arm, that's actually going to help them, when in all reality that could harm them, because they already have a certain pitch count, and then you're doing the same type of motion that could lead to injury long term.
Okay.
And Marty, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I grew up in that whole functional training. We could define it, but they could see it. They're like, well, that's functional training. Well, how do you do it? Well, just do crazy stuff that mimics things. We've come a long way from that because, to Wendy's point, I worked in professional baseball. We had a lot of players who are one side dominant. And if you look at the size of a bat, 32 ounces is the minimum, up to 34, 35 ounces. And they're taking hundreds upon hundreds of swings a day. do I really need to now grab a cable and have them do a downward chop, or should I maybe undo that pattern and maybe have them lift in the opposite direction to get them back to neutral? And maybe that's functional training. I just think that when functional training came out, it was, let's mimic a movement that they do in their sport and load it. There might be a point in time in a phase of training for that, but it's not as much as I think that people used to do, 15, 20 years ago when that term kind of came to the forefront. Functional training could be an anterior tib exercise for somebody. If you need to increase the activation of your anterior tib, it's functional to do resisted dorsiflexion. I think for a long time, people wouldn't have counted that as functional training. So to Wendy's point, our job is to get the body to move normally, ideally, and have all the different phases of training in their back pocket so they are stable, they have strength, endurance, and they're powerful in all planes of motion with ideal or close to ideal motion in all their joints, and get muscles to move together and create solid, sound movement patterns, and then leave the specifics to their coach. Doesn't mean there's not a point in time throughout the year you might do some of that, but that's usually during the off season before they get back into the heavy competition. Once they're in heavy competition, you might have to really decrease a lot of volume. And I can tell you, for my baseball players that were playing a lot, I had to almost not do a lot of power because that's what they were doing all day in practice and in the cages. I had to spend more time on the stabilization than I did during the off season. I would increase their power because they weren't participating in the sport.
Yeah, thanks for that explanation from both of you. And the biggest point is that I think both of you said the same thing. We're not here to mimic their sport. Now, if you have an athlete, for example, who doesn't have a specific coach, you can do some general SAQ exercises for sure to get them moving fast, get them changing directions and that sort of thing. But we want to leave the skill. We want to leave the skill up to the experts and kind of know the domains that we can actually give the athletes a lot of benefit, which is the CES, which is training through all of the phases of the OPT model. Just having them, just creating a very solid base for them so that they can go into any environment and perform. So do we have any, so we're back to we're now down to the cool down. And Wendy, you talked about how you do some soft tissue work with him on the end of the program. So let's talk about his cool down now.
Yeah, so I actually do the soft tissue work sometimes before we actually get started. So I do it on the front end, and at the bottom end or at the end of his workout, he'll go through and he'll either foam roll on his own if we're running out of time, or if I have time, I'll actually use like the hypervolt or some type of vibration, therapy to try to calm certain muscles down that we obviously use throughout the workout. Now, keep in mind, John also has some of this equipment on his own, and he does a lot of this stuff at home as well. But we would have him foam roll his calves, his adductors, and his lats again, just same thing we did in the beginning. You can think about all the jumping that he did, so why the calves would need it. Again, the adductors, just to make sure we got good alignment in the hip. And then, of course, with that internal or inward rotation we saw on the single leg, it would be beneficial. And again, as Marty explained why we would do the lats, we would do the lats again. And then we would have him statically stretch the calves, hip flexors, and lats. So again, exactly what he did in the very beginning. We were just thinking about some of the muscles that he used throughout the workout where he could kind of get the most bang for his buck, if you will. Could he have done other ones? Absolutely. But again, these are just for a programming for programming purposes. You can see that it would be good to foam roll and stretch these particular muscles.
Okay, I think this is a pretty straightforward program. Do you have any other tips? Just for anyone out there who's listening who is working with athletes, do you have any tips on how to use this model to make it work for their situation?
I think for me, again, I've had John for a really long time. And so I know his body and I know him very well, and we stay in communication. I think the key thing is communication. Because again, if I didn't have a lot of the data sent to me over the time that he was training, or because even in season, I'm following up with him. I'm asking if he's doing his programs, because we send a lot of corrective exercise and stabilization type workouts that he does on the road. Because when he goes in and works with his, at camp, or he's doing stuff with the team, they may be doing a lot of power and explosive exercises, but we want to make sure that he maintains proper alignment and he understands the importance of that. Now, the first season, when I first got him as a client, his overhead squat.
So we're going to have to wait. This was a cliffhanger here, so you'll have to wait. Okay. So his overhead squat and go.
Yeah, his overhead squat and his dynamic assessment results, they were not as clean as they were what we just saw. Again, this is after working with me for 3 seasons and maintaining communication. So the first time I worked with him, for the first 4 weeks, we spent a lot of time in phase 1, a lot of time. And we had 3 months to get him prepared before he left for camp. And so don't just rush into thinking that they need to do a phase 5 because they're a professional athlete. I mean, we built a very, very, very strong foundation and, worked on everything before we started to load him into strength and then into power. Because again, he's worth a lot of money. So we want to make sure that we don't break him down, because we're hoping to get him at a higher level in a phase of training, which would not maximize him long term.
Thank you. And this next question is for both of you, but you brought up a great point, Wendy. These athletes are worth a lot of money. Someone's paid, I'm sure, taken out insurance policies, invested a lot of money over the season, and probably the way their team performs depends on these athletes' performance. So my question is how do you work, or do you work with the team staff? Do you share recommendations, let them know what you're doing? How does that work? This is for both of you.
Well, I can go first. I mean, for instance, even with this guy, yes. So I can share, I take goniometric assessments every single time he comes in, because again, I keep track of everything. So therefore, if his strength and conditioning coach wants to see stuff, or, his PTs or any of the medical staff needs to see anything, I have that documented, as well as every single workout we've done is documented. And I mean, I've literally at the beginning of seasons had people call me because they're running faster, they're moving better, and they want to know what I did with them. And, again, I have the science and the background to understand of why I'm doing certain programs and the way that I'm doing it. And it actually, they find it, a lot of people, they find very interesting, because they're still learning about the NASM concepts and the OPT model, because some people don't have that background. They just have their CSCS, or they have other types of forms of training that are awesome as well. It's just different. And so I think, obviously staying in communication, I'm very open with my programming, because I'm very confident in what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And I think that is actually key.
Okay. And Marty, how have you worked with team staff in your role as a personal trainer?
Sure. I was more working for a team, so I can give you the opposite side is, I was very open and always wanted to make that team approach, because, I was responsible for them primarily during the season. And then I had to have a good relationship with everybody during the off season. So everything Wendy said is absolutely spot on. I'll just give a different side of it, because you're going to run into some people who don't want to share, or may not understand your philosophies, or may have a different disagreement. Just always think about your athlete and make sure that you're, professional, polite. Don't be surprised if there's not some pushback on occasion if you have a different philosophy. Just understand what your role is, and, try not to create an uncomfortable situation for your client, because I've been in that situation where I had other people that really didn't want to share and were very protective, because this is how they fed their family, was with this athlete. So just understand that it's complex. I'm sure some of you have maybe even had, some client who lives in 2 different areas, and trainer to trainer, they may not be open and forthcoming. So when you start to throw in the complexity of professional sports, don't be surprised if you hit a couple roadblocks. Just do everything Wendy said, document it, explain what you're doing, be very open, and then now you're being ethical in all ways. But I can just give the other side of it, that sometimes you're going to run into some roadblocks. it just comes with the territory when you work with elite athletes.
Okay, thank you for that. It's definitely a community effort when you're working with clients with multiple practitioners. So we are up against the end of the hour. So while we're waiting, and I hope that those of you who are still with us listening have some questions to ask for Wendy and Marty. But while we're waiting for those, Wendy, what's your big takeaway for today's webinar?
I think my big takeaway is basically what we've been discussing the entire time. Again, make sure before you are to perform this type of workout or have a client or an athlete perform this, that they're ready. Because if there are any doubts or there's a lot of compensations, this is really, and we don't want to, you never want to sacrifice your form for a number. You never want to put them in an exercise.
Yeah, you never want to sacrifice form for numbers or for the persona that the professional athlete carries. And you can finish that thought, Wendy. I tried to be you. It didn't work.
That was perfect. No, I mean, again, just think about the CES as a really, truly very individualized warm up that's going to prepare a client for whatever phase of training they're in. Don't just think that it is just a CES, that this is only for beginning clientele, because this can really, really help maximize any level of training in the OPT model.
All right. Thank you. And how do we get in touch?
As you can see on screen, email me at wendy.batts@nasm.org, or my Instagram is wendy.batts13. And
people out there listening to Wendy, take this information seriously. Do not ask her for a training session unless you are 100% committed. Saw from the template what could happen. So thank you for your contribution. Thanks to John for allowing us to view his training. And Marty, what's your big takeaway from today's webinar?
Like I've always saying, let the model work. All the answers are there. Just learn it, follow it, and stick to it as we have written out, and you'll get tremendous results. And dealing with an athletic population or people that are in great shape, that doesn't mean that they're really ready for this type of workout yet, with those work to rest ratios, with those sets, with those reps, with that volume. So make sure that they progress to it, they earn the right to get to it, and then you'll get tremendous results. Don't skip anything, because that's where you get in trouble once you start getting into this. If you skipped your progressions, if you skipped your warm up, that's where bad things, but we want you to go through the entire continuum and you get the best results. And then contact me there, marty.miller@nasm.org, and then Instagram is miller.marty72.
All right. Thank you, Marty. And just at the close of the hour, we got a question from Kelly. And this can be for both of you. This is regarding using the goniometer. And Kelly wants to know, do you think it's something to consider down the line with experience rather than from the, Do you think this is something to consider down the line with experience rather than from the offset, or maybe the outset of your training life? So if I can paraphrase, can we still get valuable information from those mobility assessments? Or maybe he wants to know, can we wait a little while before we use the goniometer?
Yeah, I can jump in. So, that's why we've added in the mobility. So you can never do goniometer and still get great results. Just like anything else, we always ask you to continue to add to your toolbox. So get out there, take a course or study how to use a goniometer, practice it. And then just like Wendy, there'll be times where she uses it, times I use it, and times where you may not have access to it. And the mobility assessments will still be a perfect screening tool for you.
Okay, thank you very much for that explanation, Marty and Kelly. I hope that answered your question. And we are at the end. So thank you, Wendy, and thank you, Marty. It is always informational, and always leave with some really good insights. And thank you, Greg, for keeping this show together. And thank you for everyone who spent time with us this afternoon. And we will see you next time.